Hello planty people, welcome back to my channel. My name is Darylyn and today I want to talk about something that I always get tripped up by every year no matter what, and that is I always just completely forget how much harder it is to keep my plants happy during the winter. Now, if you are tuning in from a colder climate, you're probably thinking like, how could you possibly forget about that? It's like a huge deal. And the reason is because I live in Southern California, and so to me, it doesn't really seem like we have much of a winter down here. It doesn't ever really get that cold. And for the most part, the weather doesn't really change too much. And through October into November and sometimes even into December, down here we get a phenomenon called the Santa Ana winds that basically make the humidity drop and raise the temperature. And for whatever reason, I always forget about that. And every single year around this time, my plants start melting down and I'm always surprised by it. Like, I don't know, I guess maybe next year I will learn my lesson, but as hard as it is to watch, and it definitely makes me feel like a terrible plant mom, it is a good reminder that keeping houseplants is really difficult when you keep them in open air, even if you have really hardy plants, to be quite honest. Because the thing that plants really like, especially plants that are from tropical regions where the conditions are supposed to be kind of the same throughout most of the year, is that your conditions in your house change all the time. It's really difficult to keep everything constant. And so something that I kind of have to remind myself is that having my plants, I need to think of them more as in like a state of flux, and they are always going to need kind of constant pruning and planning in order to make them continue to look the way that I want them to. So I know that the term winter growth gets thrown around a lot in the plant community, and it's such an important thing to remember because I think we're always used to seeing these big, lush, gorgeous, perfect plants on Instagram and whatnot. But winter growth is a thing, y'all, and it can be so deflating sometimes. I wish that I had a grow tent big enough to put everybody in every year. I wish that I had a gigantic greenhouse. I wish that I had a climate-controlled plant room with humidifiers and everything, but unfortunately, that's just not my situation. So I kind of have to just like make do with what I can. And I just need to remind myself that over the winter, if I get some wonky leaves and I get some ugly blemishes on leaves, if the plant starts to get a little bit leggy or lean more towards the light, because the one thing that we do have during winter in Southern California is much, much less natural light, that's not necessarily a sign of the plant declining. It's just adapting to the conditions that it has right now. I do have grow lights, and I think the plants definitely appreciate that and benefit from it. But at the end of the day, most grow lights that aren't designed for, a much larger operation than most of us have in our homes are just not going to be anything comparable to the level of energy that our plants get from natural sunlight. It's just not really comparable. So reminding myself that just because my plants may not be looking their best right now, it does not mean that they will always look terrible. I think it's a good sign that even though maybe they're not putting on the same kind of show that they were in the spring and summer, most of my plants are still growing. I'm still seeing roots form when I check on them. And I'm still seeing self-watering reservoirs get sucked up super quickly, actually probably even faster than usual because the humidity dropped. Throughout the rest of the year, my humidity in this room usually tended to be about 65, and last week it plummeted all the way down to 40, and it definitely showed. A couple of my plants got really angry about it, but you know what? They're all still here. I'm still getting lots of growth, and I just have to kind of take it with a grain of salt and look forward to spring. So I'm just kind of trying to get ideas for projects of how I want to grow my plants, which ones I want to put on poles, boards, and hopefully next year I can take the plants that I have and just maybe have to take a few steps backwards from where they were at, the end of the growing season, but it's all gonna be okay. They're gonna bounce back. And my goal for this winter is that I'm just gonna try really, really hard not to lose any plants. which that can be easier said than done because the fluctuation in conditions can sometimes really shock a plant, especially if it's a small or a juvenile plant. So I went ahead and actually put all of my little anthurium propagations that I used to have in the little cups with the saran wrap over them, and I cleaned out my little glass terrarium and I put all of those in there for the winter. So hopefully they do well in there and I don't lose any of them. But even if I do, you know, it is kind of what it is. Not everything survives in nature, so I guess we can't really expect everything to survive when we're cultivating plants in an environment that's just completely different from how they're supposed to be growing in the wild. But another thing that I do kind of want to just put out there, if anyone's interested, is that I actually have a greenhouse here in Southern California that is outside and it's not climate controlled at all. There's nothing automated about it. There's no grow lights in there. Everything in there, all they get is natural light, and there's actually a shade cloth on top of it too so that the plants don't get fried, and the temperature in there fluctuates just like the temperature outside. The only way that I really am able to adjust the humidity is that I just wet down the inside of the greenhouse with a hose, and that helps the humidity stay up. I do have a little temperature and humidity meter that I can download the temperature fluctuations in to see what the maximum temperature is, what the minimum temperature is. And I have a lot of aeroids in there. I have a lot of anthurium in there. I have some philodendrons. I have some monstera. And so far, I have not had any plants die. And looking at the temperature and humidity readings from my little meter that I have in the greenhouse, those plants have been tolerating wide fluctuations in temperature and humidity, and a lot of them have been doing way better in there than they did in my house. Before I got the silver shade cloth, temperatures would spike over 100 degrees in there, and then they would swing down into the 60s and even 50s at night. None of the plants flinched except for the ones that had run out of water. I think that even though it can sometimes be really frustrating and a little demoralizing to see our plants kind of declining over the winter, our plants are a lot more resilient than we really give them credit for. As long as you are providing them an environment that's, you know, comfortable enough and livable enough for you, they're probably going to do fine. They're probably going to be really resilient. It's just, you know, if your humidity drops, you got to make sure that they have more water. If the light drops, maybe you're gonna need to actually water a little bit less or go out of your way, get some grow lights. It's just a learning process, and I feel like every year I forget everything I learned the previous year, but hopefully we don't suffer any significant losses this year and everyone's going to be ready to bounce back in the spring. It was extremely nerve-wracking to put a lot of those plants into that greenhouse, and I'm actually really glad that I put a couple of, you know, canaries into that coal mine, so to speak, before I went and, you know, stuffed it full of everything that I hold dear, because there was a little bit of a learning curve. You definitely do not want to put a greenhouse that has like completely clear plastic outside in direct sun and then put plants into it. I had a couple of plants get quite burned from the sun, so the silver shade cloth really helped with that. Self-watering pots in the greenhouse has been such a lifesaver because it's allowing me to not have to go in and check on everything every day. It's been a really fun journey, and it's taught me a lot about how resilient some of these plants are, because I have multiples of plants. Some of them are in the greenhouse and some are in my house. And even though the plants in the greenhouse are having to deal with much wider fluctuations in temperature, much wider fluctuations in humidity, a lot of them are doing better than the ones that are in my house. So I think I would probably chalk that up to the availability of real sunlight, because the one pitfall I do think about how I'm able to keep my plants in my house is that I really don't get a lot of natural sunlight in here because I'm on the first floor, so I like to keep my drapes closed. But this has been kind of rambly, but I think a lot of people are probably going through the same thing right now, struggling with their plants over the winter. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there and say, hey, you're not alone. Your plants are resilient. Superficial leaf damage is not going to be the end of the world. Just pay attention. Your plants will probably bounce back in the spring. And if you have a couple of special ones that you're able to put into like a mini greenhouse or a grow tent or something like that, definitely do it. It's definitely worth it. My plants that are in my little greenhouse, in my living room, and in my grow tent, none of them have flinched. And I actually went ahead and put my Queen Anthurium back into the grow tent because she was just not having a fun time out in open air when the humidity dropped from 65 to 40. So hang in there, everybody. We will get through this winter and your plants are gonna bounce back in the spring. I'm so excited for the growing season to start. Like really, like can it start now? I guess that's gonna be it for me today, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.